2022's Game Awards happened recently, and chances are if you watched it, there was one game that people kept talking about a lot. It was this cute little niche indie game. It's pretty underground. I forget the name of it. It's called something like
God of War Ragnarok. God of War Ragnarok. God of War Ragnarok.
God of War Ragnarok.
God of War Ragnarok. God of War Ragnarok.
God of War Ragnarok is the sequel to the 2018 God of War game, a game that was just as adored as Ragnarok seems to be nowadays. Both of these games are critically acclaimed spectacles. They're very high budget and very high production value, and that money spent has clearly paid off. But these two games, despite coming out 4 years apart, are not really that different from one another. They've made the odd gameplay change here and there, and the boss fights are, new boss fights, but these games are very similar to each other in terms of gameplay, or at least the gameplay that's actually there is similar, at least. These games are much more like playable movies than they are video games. Most of the emphasis is placed on the story and the visuals and the cutscenes. The gameplay is cool and all, but it's clearly not taking center stage. Now, is there anything wrong with that? No, of course not. It's clearly popular. It's clearly worth the excitement that surrounds it. But if I were to describe God of War Ragnarok using one word, that word would be safe. It's a very safe game. The success of God of War 2018 proved that this sort of high-budget, story-driven, third-person action game is marketable and has an audience of people that want to play it. And before God of War 2018, you had things like Uncharted or Horizon. These games aren't exactly the same as each other, but they share enough similarities that the success of one of these franchises tells the industry that other games like it could also succeed. Now again, I'm not slagging off these games. I'm not saying they're bad or that they're not worth playing, but they're safe. They're proven to be marketable success stories for the industry. And if you're a AAA giant making PlayStation exclusives, then proven success stories is exactly what you want. And this methodology of designing and creating games creates stagnation in the industry. This causes the types of AAA games that come out in any given year to homogenize into one big clump of sameness. In fact, recently there was this little tweet going around where a bunch of big content creators were going on a tangent about how games are all the same nowadays, and how games companies need to branch out from making the same cookie cutter games over and over again. But my answer to this is just play indie games. If your only gaming experiences come from games that were made by giant billion-dollar corporations, then yeah, you're gonna see this sort of thing. Every game is gonna look the same to you, because they are pretty similar to each other. But please, go play indie games. I beg you. Indie games are booming with creativity. Games that are so out of the box that I've never experienced anything like them before or since. And more of them keep releasing. More of these games are on the horizon. So if you find yourself getting burnt out of the seemingly unending slog of games that all look and feel pretty similar to each other, then you've just got to go play some indie titles. If you're looking for suggestions, I've got a video where I recommend a handful of indie games that I think are worth playing. You should go watch that, because my opinions on video games are really, really good, and the games I like are really good, and you should go play. But you might be wondering, why is it that indie games feature so much more diverse and interesting gameplay concepts? Because the devs that work at AAA companies aren't just dumber and less creative people. AAA devs are just as creative and come up with just as many crazy ideas, surely. So why don't they get made? Well, the answer is pretty simple, and the best way I can explain it is with Call of Duty. Call of Duty is unbelievably popular, and as the gaming industry gets bigger and bigger, so does Call of Duty's popularity. Call of Duty is the best-selling game almost every year, and it has been for the last 13 years. Between 2009 and 2021, Call of Duty was the best-selling game every year except from in 2013 and 2018. In 2013, GTA 5 was the best-selling game, obviously, and in 2018 it was Red Dead Redemption 2. But other than these 2 years, Call of Duty has been in the top spot for more than a decade. So as much as the internet might bash on Call of Duty constantly for being extremely samey, they clearly don't put their money where their mouth is, because the Call of Duty bubble is alive and well, and it's getting bigger with each passing year. So now, put yourself in Activision's shoes. You released Modern Warfare 2 in 2009, and it's the best-selling game of the year. You've clearly caught lightning in a bottle with this one, and you want to release a sequel. So you of course don't change the formula too much, but you make a new one with a new coat of paint the year later. And that is the best selling game of that year too. So you release another one, and another one, and then another one. Now, I know that some of these are developed by Treyarch, and some of them are developed by Infinity Ward, but they're in the same franchise, and they have the same publisher, so the success of one influences the other one's development, without a doubt. So the point still stands. There's not really any incentive to change the formula when you've been on top of the game for more than a decade. Now, that's not to say that nobody does anything spicy with their big franchises, though. Call of Duty Warzone is a brand new spin on the Call of Duty franchise. It's completely different from the main series of games, but the reason they made Warzone is because it's a battle royale game, which mimics Fortnite, which is literally the most popular game in the world right now. And they also had zombie mode introduced in Call of Duty World at War in 2008. But zombie games in 2008 were all the rage. It was a cool innovation, and it broke the mold of the other Call of Duty games, but it was an extremely safe call to make at the time. People loved zombie games in 2008. But even with all of this resistance to change, you still might be wondering why things wouldn't just change anyway. Like, game devs are creative people. The people that make these games are incredibly talented and would obviously have tons of unique and creative ideas for new games, or crazy takes on pre-existing games. But when you work at a AAA company, these ideas will never get made. Not because they're bad ideas, but because you have to pitch your crazy ideas to the higher-ups. The marketing managers and the CFOs and the executives that make the business run correctly. So if you pitch a super incredible and revolutionary idea for a game to these people, they will shoot you down instantly. Not because the idea was bad, not because the idea couldn't have been made, but because the idea isn't proven. It's not proven to be popular. It's not proven to be marketable. And it's not proven to be a moneymaker. Because yeah, a zombie survival mode in Call of Duty is a really crazy and creative idea. But if I had to make a guess, the only reason it got made is because the guys who pitched it were able to point at the dozens of other successful zombie games at the time and say, hey, look at this, people love zombies. You can sell this to people, trust me. AAA companies, for the most part, are void of these super creative ideas that you see in the indie game world, because they're risky business moves for billion-dollar corporations. They would need your wacky idea to have the same attention, care, and polish as every other game they make, but the creative idea risks being a flop because of how different it is. So they risk making a high-budget game with a creative gameplay concept that turns out to be a massive flop. But indie games do not have this problem, because when an indie dev team wants to make a game, it's not because they want to make $1 billion in this next quarter, it's because they want to make a good game. A group of a few people had an idea for a really cool game, so they just started making it, and however many years later they release it and it's a masterpiece. This can only happen at an indie company. There's too much red tape inside of AAA companies, too many board members to please, too many external factors impacting a game's success, and there's just too much money on the line to go out making games with crazy unique gameplay concepts that die on the spot. And when indie devs start hitting the big time, they start falling to the same pressures that AAA companies experience. They start making sequels and re-releases too. Now, is this a bad thing? No. Is Hades 2 going to be a bad game? Of course not. But it's interesting to note that Supergiant Games have never made a sequel until now, and their first sequel came right after the resounding success and critical acclaim of Hades. But this is why you should play indie games more often. Indie games are where you go to find the beautiful gems that you can't find anywhere else. The games that are clearly awesome concepts, but AAA companies are just clearly too afraid to make. There's nothing wrong with AAA games. It's not like they're bad. And there are some AAA companies keeping it relatively wacky just like the indie devs do. But for the most part, AAA companies are stagnating, and they stagnate on purpose. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that you should go play Outer Wilds. Just please go and play Outer Wilds. Like, I promise you it's the best game you will ever play.